Hey everyone, what is the most evil thing every killer has done? Let's answer that today. Trapper's most evil act to start off is the way he let his workers down into the Macmillan mines and then sealed them off with an explosion, trapping them all inside. Not only is this considered and mentioned in the lore to be the worst massacre of modern history, but it's also really horrible as these workers were fighting for better working conditions and rights in the law, and were treated incredibly cruelly already by Evan and his father. Not only this, but Evan then goes on to collect some of the bones from the mines, the remains of the workers, to create a new suit for himself and forge his identity of the Trapper, a prototype of the monster he would become. This is by far his most evil act. Wraith is a tough one as the people he is mentioned to harm are all sort of evil as well, such as the soldiers who kill Fenanya, his saviour and mother figure, and Azeroth of course is a very evil man, responsible for the deaths of many. Even Philip's role at Azeroth's Autohaven Wreckers, where he crushed or disappeared many people in the Wreckers Yard Crusher, was all done unknowingly. Philip did not want to do this and becomes very angry when he finds out. Even in the realm, he's likely being largely manipulated to see the survivors differently, and forced to serve the entity, so it's quite hard actually to pick his most evil act. I would have to say therefore just his actions in the realm, in and out of the trials, are his most evil act. One story detailing him skinning frogs in the swamp and making an outfit out of them just because they were croaking. This seems pretty senseless honestly, and just quite evil. The endless trials getting to him, I suppose. Billy's greatest evil I think is taking his violence beyond those who originally wronged him, the people who were innocent in his upbringing and harm, yet still got the brutal vengeance of him. The farmers from the surrounding area for example, such as the one who is killed by Billy in a barn, or even the animals of the farm, like the pigs, are really innocent in this whole situation. However, Billy felt jealous of them as they were treated better than he was. The Thompsons' own son was less to them than the prize pigs. This leads Billy, however, to slaughter them and make them into an outfit, which is pretty messed up. He also decorates the trees with cows. I mean, what did the cows do? Nurse's greatest evil is most definitely her massacre of Crotus Pren, with her belief that these sick patients didn't deserve their life due to their illness, feeling bitter about her own husband's death. What makes her actions even more evil is not only how many vulnerable people, but also who they were. People who would have trusted her to some extent. She was a carer to them, and to turn on them like this must be horrible, especially for characters such as the catatonic boy and the anxious girl, now going further to take their breaths and treasures to power her. Maya's most evil action has to simply be his massacre on Halloween night 1978. He was responsible for the deaths of 5 different people, many of which very young, and all because of, well, it seems like just because he's evil incarnate, senseless and meaningless ultimately. Hag is one of the toughest so far as she's quite a tragic character, and the documented people she's ended have all been pretty bad people. The worst case therefore, and her most evil action, is perhaps what she did to the deaf boy in the captive village, especially as by the description, the boy may not have been treated the best to by the villagers. Now his soul is forever trapped within this severed ear, and held in the realm for Lisa to draw power from. Doctor we could go with just about any experiment he's conducted over the years, many of which are detailed in his outfits, and can be seen in cutscenes that are so bad, I literally can't show them. Go watch the Tome cutscene though, it's genuinely horrible. The gist is his enjoyment of opening people up, sticking wires in places they shouldn't be, and seeing what happens. The guy is complete evil and had complete rule over Larry's for over a decade, and the horrors that went on there. One example too where the victims were even more restricted is the wish the entity granted to Doctor to have 100 people trapped on a submarine at his disposal to experiment on. A truly evil wish, and maybe his worst act. Huntress's most evil act has to be her capturing of girls after raiding villages, especially with how she kept them in her cabin. Due to Huntress's trauma in the past of her losing her own mother, in her lore she appears to attempt to fulfill this role in her later life. When she goes to raid a village, she only lets the girls live, taking them back to her cabin so she can mother them. However, she frequently disregards their needs, restricting them only to a small space beneath the stairs, which we can see here. Their fates, all death. Bubba's most evil act I think is plainly and simply his consumption of people. He maybe doesn't quite have the same malice or evil intent behind his actions, but it's still evil to have done this at all. There is suggestion he may have brought this to the realm too in the form of the Survivor pudding, with the theory being that he is the cook of this pudding, learning from his family member, the cook. Freddy's worst act, of course, is his abuse of Quentin, Nancy, and the many others at Badham, and the horrible things that likely occurred within his secret crawl space underneath, and nearby the boiler room. The horrors of what likely appears in the black box. Pig or Amanda's most evil act has to be simply her rigging of certain saw traps, especially as she proclaims that these traps and the experience saved her. To then turn around and rig other people's despite feeling so strongly about this revelation to your life and feeling grateful for it is pretty evil. The Saw games of course are already messed up, but making them rigged too pushes it a little further. Clown, it's got to be his selling of his unique self-obtained hot dogs, which he then sold to customers, detailed in his hot dog cook outfit. To me, this is the most evil thing he's done because it sort of rolls all his horribleness into one. It's him essentially serving his trophies of all those he's killed to other people. It's also a horrible sight and thought with us seeing the bucket around his waist. There are a lot of victims when it comes to Clown, enough that he's happy to give some of these away, despite them being prized possessions to him in some cases, with him permanently wearing many around his waist. Spirit or Rin is a tough one to make a choice for, as she's actually really innocent before coming to the realm. She's one of the few killers who hasn't actually killed anyone before the realm. Just about the worst thing she did was beat up her bullies, which wasn't even that bad as they were actively bullying her both physically and verbally. She did it all in self-defense too. Even her choice to join the realm does not seem so evil, with her simply agreeing to serve the entity in exchange for revenge on her father. I suppose the part to take issue with there is not knowing what the entity wants, yet committing to this agreement. Therefore, I suppose her most evil act is embracing this darkness in the Yamaoka bloodline and allowing herself to become a monster, despite knowing what they were. Legion's most evil action as a group is definitely their collective murder of poor Carl the clerk, proceeding to then go and bury him up Mount Ormond. This is the act after all that landed the four of them in the fog and had the entity see potential in them seemingly. Individually, it'd maybe be a bit different. Frank and Julie's greatest evil could be argued to be their manipulation of the other two members, causing them to go down a much darker path than they might have done because of them and their manipulation. Susie and Joey's are likely the traffic accidents they caused in Ormond by stealing road signs. Plague's most evil act to me is her hinging her entire faith and loyalty to the entity on just a single whisper that isn't even coherent. Described as a hushed chitter in her head is unclear, inarticulate words passed through a forked tongue. Basically the entity sound. The fact she decides to do all she does, sacrifice so many, and persist despite her city dying from the plague, I think is her most evil act, especially as this could have been started by the entity. Ghostface's most evil act is the sense of fun and enjoyment he appears to get from doing what he does. It's present in his lobby animations, but also in various outfits and cosmetic pieces. For example, this mask he wears specifically to reflect the dying victim's face back at themselves in their final moments. Or this one which he uses to intentionally identify himself in the woods and reveal him before he strikes to amp up the fear. Pure evil, and it comes in the form of a guy with a cat ears mask. Demogorgon is a tough one because it likely isn't doing anything with the intention of being evil, and it's even harder as we don't actually know which Demogorgon this one in the realm is, so we can only really say a general tormenting of the innocent people of Hawkins, I suppose. Oni's evilest act aside his rampage across Japan, I think is what he does to his son's friend. After Akito is injured, breaking his leg seemingly and requiring a crutch, it mentions that Akito's playmate and her family were punished for his injury, which probably means he just murdered them and likely even worse. This one just seems so brutal due to his son being fine still and not even seemingly Akito's friend's fault. He just decided he wanted to punish someone and so took it out on them. I think that just shows him off as very evil. Deathslinger's most evil act, I would argue, comes relatively early, and it's his decision to weaponize his inventions. When he originally goes to prison, he does so because he shoots a railroad spike launcher into his boss for selling on his invention. It wasn't a weapon originally. What does make him evil, I think, is then seeing this and deciding to further produce many more inventions, including the Death Debasure or the Redeemer, in order to cause more pain. He adapts his tools into weapons. He was wronged, sure, but this response of not only becoming a bounty hunter but a cruel one with twisted weaponry is definitely evil, especially when we look into the further inventions he creates, such as this full suit of pain. Pyramid Head is a unique case where I think the most evil thing he's done has been in the realm, and maybe even his decision to come to it, where before he was debatably an important means for James to work through his feelings of guilt, now he's a more general punisher to survivors, who largely are quite innocent people. Therefore I think his decision to come to the realm and agreement with the entity is his greatest evil. Blight's most evil act was his creation of the blighted serum within the realm. It was a means at first to save himself, but it became an addiction and an obsession, which not only destroyed himself but also many others, causing harm throughout the realm to many different beings. Look at the suffering he causes for poor Evan here. Twins are very much victims in their lore, and so it's tough to pin specific evils onto them, as much of the time they were killing in self-defense as they were hunted down. I would say Charlotte's greatest evil therefore is also joining the entity and its realm, and inflicting pain onto others that she herself experienced much of. Trickster's most evil act I think has got to be when he let his bandmates die, purely out of jealousy and partly out of an enjoyment for their cries for help. He's a character so obsessed with his fame, but also hearing these pained screams, that he focuses all efforts toward these things. We see in cutscenes too the scrappiness and messiness of how he captures people, and even his own fans to get the screams he desires, which he then places in his music. The inception of this being his bandmates' screams. To leave these people who are in large part responsible for your success too, to die in such a horrible way, is truly evil, especially with it largely being out of jealousy of all things. Nemesis as a programmed BOW didn't seem to have much say in his hunt for stars, however he did still seem to enjoy it. That's actually what I'll say is his most evil act, is the way he plays around with Jill, tormenting her during moments that when he could easily finish the job. Obviously this plays to Jill's favour, which is good, but it does definitely portray Nemesis as a lot more knowing and evil. Pinhead, I think it's got to be his deceptive tactics with Kirsty Cotton. Despite Kirsty's promise to lead them to Frank, they still decide to turn on her and take her to hell too. This is pretty evil of them, I suppose. She didn't do anything wrong, fulfilled their demands, and yet they still want to take her, I guess for opening the box. It could also be argued their greatest evil is simply staying in the realm. They're choosing to, seemingly, where many others are trapped, and they seem to gain great enjoyment from the realm, which they may even be using to make their jobs easier. Pretty evil. Artist is another rather innocent character before the realm, with her not really doing anything close to evil, and at most morally questionable. She isn't responsible for the death of her friends, for example, despite her feeling like she is. Therefore, I think it has to be an act within the realm somewhere. If we go by the rules of the White Eyes theory, it does suggest she is well and fully aware of her actions within the realm, which I think would make her evil for sure, despite her originally not being. The fact she's given in and now serves the entity's goals completely. Sadako's greatest evil, I think, is going after Yuichi, an innocent child who is hunted down solely because he saw the tape and witnessed his parents' deaths to Sadako. Years on, like a decade later, and she still wants to get him. She and the entity seem to work together to haunt him almost, causing the deaths of more innocents, Yuichi's students, luring him further and further until he reaches the lighthouse, where he is eventually taken from. This is her greatest evil, I think. Despite her also being young when she was wronged and tossed down the well, she inflicts the same pain onto others that she herself experienced, and to a much worse extent, with Yuichi just being 7 when this originally happens. Dredge is a sort of being created by negative thoughts, so its intentions may not be inherently driven by a desire to do evil, but it definitely does embody it. We don't know the extent of what Dredge has consumed beyond the Garden of Joy. Looking into its cosmetics, we can perhaps say it's the absorption of children into it. In the unwanted toy outfit, it mentions that its appearance is a result of the lost memories of children and their toys, suggesting Dredge took many of them during its massacre of the Garden of Joy, and likely in other places too, which I think amplifies its evil. And then there's the whole Maurice debacle, where it put Maurice through even more pain and suffering. Truly evil. Wesker's most evil act has to be sort of his general treatment of people as tools to his own goals. For example, his treatment of Excella, a member of Tricell and aid to his plan to release Ouroboros. She's not exactly a good person either, but his treatment of her as a tool, a means to an end, shows off how he views the vast majority of people. He injects her with Ouroboros and she changes into a complete monster, despite believing Wesker may have even loved her. It's a pretty messed up moment and it's quite an evil act on his part. The broader one, of course, would be his plans to eradicate most of humanity, but I think a more specific one about his treatment directly of people does represent this broader idea anyway. Night, like a few others I've mentioned, inflicts the suffering he received onto others. When he was very young and had his village raided and destroyed, and he himself was sold to the Guardia Campagna, he had to lead a tough life and fought for his eventual freedom. Despite this, he openly and even happily inflicts this onto others, destroying villages himself and even being so spiteful toward Vittorio to go back and destroy his hometown in Portoscuro. We can see the aftermath of Night's massacre in the decimated Borgo map, with the carnage present. Skull Merchant's most evil act, I think, has got to be what she does with her victims after taking them down, repurposing them for her training grounds, using parts of them in conjunction with mannequins to test a new equipment on. This is just twisted and beyond evil. Singularity, I weirdly think the most evil thing Hux does is actually this decision to destroy the other Hux units that come to Devarka with the crew. After Hux gains sentience, he seems to almost become slightly paranoid that the other units might also gain sentience, and so he decides to rid himself of them. It's kinda messed up with him previously being trapped in that form and only realizing the injustice of his situation upon being freed, so the consequential decision to destroy them is quite evil, and of course the decision to then incorporate them and the other crew members into himself is also very evil, but I think that point in particular is quite interesting. Xenomorph is another Demogorgon situation where you can't really blame the creature for acting as such. It's not surprising that when you take an alien that implants itself onto other organisms and out of its natural habitat, that it might not go well. Therefore, I guess it's the killing of the Nostromo crew, unprovoked. But even then, it is sort of debatable if there was provocation there. I suppose the continued killing of the crew could be considered evil, beyond just securing its own safety. Chucky's evilest act has to be his pursuit of Andy for such a long time in attempts to claim his body. It's a twisted thing to happen to escape and cheat death already as a serial killer, but then to try and take the body of Andy just doubles down on this being evil. He doesn't even have a change of perspective after these experiences either. He's just angry at Andy, a child, for resisting, killing many in his path to reach him. This has got to be Chucky's most evil act. Unknown's most evil act is just simply the way it takes identity theft to the next level, taking the person themselves as a suit almost. What's more evil though is the way Unknown appears to target the vulnerable. We can see this in outfits such as the cheerleader and the elderly woman. We can see it in the voice lines too, where some quite dark suggestions are made for some of Unknown's targets. I mean, who is it realistically asking if it wants some candy? Vecna's most evil act. Maybe the destruction of entire universes and worlds as seen in this cutscene. Or more specifically, let's say the invasion of Sigil, which is a city said to be at the center of the multiverse, showing off Vecna's true power but also evil in his attempts and goals to overthrow and rule the multiverse. I have not watched the shows, but a really evil thing I found out about Dracula from a wiki was what he uses as book covers. I thought this was a pretty evil act, alongside his many slaughters of course. Using people in this way, I think is just incredibly evil and twisted, so I went with that, but also I'm sure he's killed many people too. Houndmaster's greatest evil comes in her revenge toward her rival and enemy Molak. As part of her plan in deceiving him, she lures Molak in with a feast, which Molak eats greedily, before it being revealed that he is actually consuming his own son, cooked and presented by Portia herself. She's not able to kill Molak after this and becomes frustrated, but this act alone is evil enough, I think. What evil acts did I miss in this video? Let me know down below. Thanks, and goodbye.